Thanks, Kate. It's great. It's great to have so many people joining us for what is a topic really close to our hearts. Just a couple of other points to start off with is that we have closed captioning and transcription available. If that's something that would be useful to you, that you can have a look down at the bottom of your screen. You should see some options to start subtitles, that you'll find those there. Also, we've got Kate, as you've met, and we've also got Eleanor, who's got WGGB next to her. If you're having any technical difficulties, do feel free to drop them a direct message. They'll do everything that they can to make sure that it's working as well as it can be for you. And we're going to be sharing some screens at various points, so you might find it helpful if you're not a Zoom aficionado, just to know that you can change your view. So you can change it so that you're just seeing the speakers, or that you're just seeing anybody. And there's a little tag at the top right on most of the apps, where you can switch between the different things. So I'm Lesley Gannon, I'm Deputy General Secretary of the Guild, and I am delighted to be joined today by Jen Toksvig. Would you like to say hello, Jen?
Oh, I'm muted. Hello. It's lovely to see so many people. Some I know, some I don't. Hello, it's really great that you're all here.
Excellent. So with the final few people just about to come in, we'll just wait for those. I'm going to start sharing the screen. Hopefully now you can all see that. And if you can't, just try clicking some of the buttons that are around you. We've got the chat there. There's a function for you for anything that you need to ask. We'll be picking them up, but we're mainly going to ask questions at the end, because we've structured the session for you. So hopefully we will be picking up on anything. But if not, there's always those opportunities. Just drop them into the chat and we'll pick them up from there. So, Jen.
Hello.
We're going to be talking about our new publication, Competition or Cut Price Commission.
Yes.
I'm going to show them in a moment where to find that on our website. But before I do that, why did we need to come up with this? Tell us what was the driving force behind the decision to make this.
The Writers Guild has dealt with many questions over the years from members about competitions, and that's just grown recently because so much has been happening online, and there's been so little ability to make live work, actual work happen properly during the lockdown period, that people have turned to things like competitions to try and keep stimulated the new writing across the craft areas. So there's a lot more of that going on now, and people are looking for ways to get their work out there. And it felt like a really important time to look at what actually makes a competition a valuable thing, and what makes a competition a more harmful thing for a writer. So we wanted to look at across the craft areas. We started looking at theatre, actually, you and I, because that's our main area, and then realized that this goes across the board. So this wonderful document, which I'm going to put the link in the chat, and there's a direct link to it. It's on the resources page, but if you are not registered, then you'll just need to do a quick email registration so that you can access the document. And then it's this amazing thing that covers all the craft areas that we're going to talk through today. So it came about because it's an increasingly large area for writers, and we wanted to make sure that writers are being treated and their work being regarded properly.
Right, so this is where you'll find it from our home page. You go to resources, you'll see that there, you click on that, you'll get a big list of all the different resources, and you'll find it. And if you clicked on the right thing, this is what it should look like. So that's how you know you've got the right one. Hopefully you can steer your way there.
So I have a couple of questions for you, Lesley, I've got this thing I've written and just want to get it out there. So I'm going to send it to as many competitions as I can find, because obviously the wider I spread my net, the better it's going to be for me, the more likely I am to get good stuff out of it. So how do I go about sending it to everybody who's got a competition?
Well, what this guidance is talking about and what the Guild is talking about when we're talking about a competition is what we're calling an open call invitation. So it might not call itself a competition. This is about open calls, and certainly you're going to encounter, as a writer, loads of different open calls.
So please send us your work. We're doing a workshop and we want to choose some pieces to do some dramaturgy with. Please send us your work. We're doing an evening of short pieces and we just are looking for the right short pieces, like anything that has a competitive element to it where your work might be accepted or rejected. Yes.
Well, yeah. So when we're talking about an open invitation, we mean anything that anyone can enter, or that a specific group can enter, that the requirements for entry are open and transparent. So this guide is talking about anything like that, where work is being invited by a company, by a venue, by a publisher, by a magazine, by a website, whoever, is all in here, even if the competition word isn't being used, and that's really important.
Cool. So how do we know if it's a competition that we should be putting work forward to? That's the main question, isn't it? How do we know if it's a good one?
So our view, and the view that this document takes, is that really, to be a reputable competition, to actually be a competition, it's going to offer you one of three things, or a combination of those. I'm just going to share another slide. And I'm just to see if it will actually switch to the show. Here we go. So one of the first things that a competition is going to offer is a prize or an award that is offering you some financial compensation. And by that, what we mean is that you're going to get some sort of financial prize that is either appropriate to what you would get if you were being commissioned to do that in the industry, or that it's something more than you would expect. So you're going to get an amount of money that is above or equivalent to that which you would expect for your stage of career.
So actually, that might be quite surprising, because it implies that if I'm organising a competition, it's probably going to cost me more than if I was just doing a straightforward commission, because not only am I giving a prize money, if I'm just giving money, not only does it have to be the same as it would cost me to pay a writer for a commission, but also I have to do all the structure of pay for the structure of the competition and all of that stuff as well, right? So it sounds more expensive than I'd expect.
The thing to bear in mind is that you're talking about two different things here.
Okay.
So I'll just get rid of that share for a moment. So if you're being commissioned for a piece of work, your payments, they usually come in different stages, but they cover different aspects. So part of a commission payment is covering the actual work of doing the writing. So you're actually writing the work itself.
I sit at my desk and I do a couple of weeks or a couple of months or whatever, and I get paid for my time.
So part of it is that.
Mm-hmm.
Another part of it then is for the usage of that work. So I hand over to write it.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to give you a bit more money so that I can use that work. And there are some rights attached with that. So it might be a license. So a license payment would be included. So if I'm commissioning work, I'm paying for all of these different aspects. For a competition, it may be that all I'm doing is I want to say, I want to encourage new writing. I want to encourage some new writing, and I want to give you some money for doing that writing. That's an entirely legitimate thing to do. Where it starts to become less legitimate or more difficult is where instead of that, I'm trying to take the rights and the usage as well as giving you some money, if the money I'm giving you is far, far lower than you should be getting for that exchange. And that's where the confusion often sits around a financial prize. When someone says, well, how much should a prize be? How much is a good financial prize? Should it be £20,000? Should it be £10? Should it be £100? It really depends on what is being taken from you in exchange for that money. And you need to know what that is in order to assess it. Obviously, the prizes and the prize amounts for an individual poem in a locally organised competition is going to be very different from, say, an international or a national competition led by a leading theatre or theatre company. Or you would expect those amounts to be very different, but it really comes down to what is being taken. And the other thing that sometimes is involved in these is a share of prize money.
So like if you're asked to pay a fee to put your work forward for the competition, then that pot of money some of that pot of money goes to the winner. Is that how that works?
Yes. So some competitions operate a scheme where they say everyone's going to pay £10 to enter their poem or their short story, and the winner gets 50% of the entrance fee, with a 10% of the collected monies for second place, or 5%. Now that's great if you understand that hundreds or thousands of people are going to enter. If only a few people are going to enter, it's possible that you could end up with a lot less. And again, how you feel about that will depend on what rights are being taken in association.
Well, also, I mean, just if we're just talking about money, if I pay a tenner to put my work forward for a competition and then I win and I get £2.50 back, then I've just spent some money on doing a thing that I didn't actually get anything out of.
You've made a loss. Congratulations. So I think it's just being aware, and it's fair to say a lot of these competitions actually are set up with good intentions. You know, yes, there is some exploitative practice out there which is deliberate, but oftentimes it's people who want to do the right thing but haven't always thought through the consequences from a writer's point of view.
I think it's also good to talk about other costs involved. If we're just talking about finance, it's very difficult for a writer to think, well, it's going to take me time to look through my work and see if I've got the right thing to put forward, prepare that material, you know, actually send it. All of that is time, and time is money for us because we're freelancers. So there's all of those costs as well. So even if there's no cost of entering, I think it's really important to factor in the time cost and the work cost of putting your stuff forward.
It's really important, and we can't say this enough really at the Guild, is that whatever stage of your writing career you're at, is that you learn the value of both your work and your time, because that's your earning potential. So
and it should be noted as well that I think the Guild, I think this is so important, the Writers Guild doesn't differentiate between a writer who's just at the beginning of their career and a writer who's been writing for 50 years. Like, no, there's no distinction made. All of our agreements and all of our guidelines and all of the best practice is for anyone who does any writing at any stage of their career. So I think it can be really difficult when you're sort of starting out, or if you've got a new piece and it feels very early, to give it the same value as your greater experience or the greater experience of a piece of work. But it's really important that we value those things in the same way, right?
Absolutely.
So money. share of entry fees, and so it's difficult. I'm an organizer of a competition, and it's difficult for me to get the money together to do that. I mean, that would be why I might do a share of the fees or something. I mean, it's all work, isn't it? It's work to put a competition together. It's work to, you know, find readers. Or so how does that factor into the money side of things?
So, I mean, a lot of this factors into your entrance fees, whether there are charges and costs associated, and it obviously, depending on the size and scale of a competition, then there's going to be a lot of admin involved in that. And I think it is legitimate often in some cases to charge a small fee to cover the administration. I think what you'll find is for some competitions there will be a nominal entrance fee which serves two purposes. One, it covers administration, so we're talking maybe a couple of pounds, you know, like people are putting a couple of pounds in. It's going to cover the time it's going to take for someone to process that information and deal with the admin. For some of the bigger competitions, occasionally there will be a higher entry fee, and some of that is to reduce, unfortunately, it is there as a bit of a barrier, it is to reduce the number of applicants. And by that, what we mean is for some massive competitions where they're dealing with large prizes on a very big scale,
some really do have like 1,000 entries. I mean, some can get huge.
I mean, and beyond, you know, and way beyond that. When they're big professional prizes, sometimes there will be a slightly larger entry fee to indicate really that they're not looking for people to send in their entire life's work, everything they've ever written, to submit it in the hope that they're going to win. It's really saying, look, this is quite a big deal. Choose your best piece of work. We are asking you to invest in this competition, and what you're going to be getting back will often reflect that. And that will, and really then we're talking about the top end of the competition market, where you've got very well-known judges and panels, where you've got really big opportunities, and it's really going to be a benefit to your career. If you're being charged a lot of money for a competition, for something with no public profile, with no real significant prize, with no really significant judges, then we would question why you're being charged so much to enter your own work.
So when the television company that's based on the third moon flying around Jupiter, does Jupiter have moons? It does, doesn't it? And they don't really broadcast work anywhere other than out into this universe to see if anybody picks it up, but they want to charge you £500 to put your work forward. Maybe think twice about that.
Think twice about that. Think twice about it.
Cool. So there are things that are offered for an additional fee. So let's just quickly talk about that. So what if a competition says, and if you pay us extra, then our judges will feedback on your work? How do we feel about those things?
So getting feedback from an appropriate skilled professional is something that people pay for, and it is worth the money if you're getting really constructive feedback about your work.
So you emphasize the words appropriate and skilled there. So how does say more about
so if someone is a professional dramaturg, if they are a teacher of creative writing, if they're working in a well-known institution, if they are someone who is a international best-selling author, who these are the people whose feedback is going to be useful to you. It's not necessarily, any feedback isn't necessarily useful. There are lots of people who will say, I liked it or I didn't like it. Someone saying, I thought this was quite good, not as good as the other entries. You could do with working more on pace. It's not really that helpful. It's not really worth the money. Probably your best friend or a colleague or a member of a writers group could give you the same level of feedback for free. So it's really important to look into who it is. As I say, the services of a good dramaturg, script editor, writing professional, then absolutely. So do the homework. Don't automatically assume that feedback is a good thing in and of itself. Find out who the feedback is from and what form it will take, because there's nothing more disappointing than paying 50, £100, in some cases, and getting something very disappointing back.
A couple of paragraphs of this is what I would have done if I'd written it.
Also be aware that the giving of feedback about someone else's creative work is a skill in and of itself, because there is an emotional response when someone gives you feedback. And it's important that if you are going to give someone perhaps not the feedback that they wanted, if you are going to have to say this needs a lot more work, I think it needs developing, it's perhaps not ready to be sent out in its current form. You want someone who's going to do that in a sensitive way, not simply say, boring, couldn't get past the second page. That's not going to help you. So do look into who it is that's offering you that advice.
Yeah, and there's also, I'm just noting things that people are saying in the comments. There's also things like they promise feedback and then the feedback doesn't arrive for like a year, and then it's one sentence of nothing. And I've just noted that the question has come up of what a good definition is of cost, and what's a reasonable cost and what isn't. And I think it's very difficult for us to really say that.
Yeah, there's a couple of different, what I would say in terms of cost and why it's very difficult to put a price on it is, one, it will do with the scale of the competition again. So but also, to be perfectly frank, it depends on your financial situation.
I think it's the scale of your thing, isn't it? Rather
what
than
proportion of your income or your savings this is going to represent. If something is asking is £5-10 and that is going to push you into a difficult financial place that week, that month, whatever, then you really want to be sure that it's something that's worth investing in, and that there aren't other opportunities to get that work seen. And there are lots of competitions and opportunities that don't make any entry fees. So I think just the fact that it's easy to find, and this is the other thing, competitions that charge are often very easy to find, and
they advertise themselves a lot
because they've got a good revenue stream. So always be very mindful of the ones that are always just popping up in your Facebook adverts or your Instagram or somewhere that we need writers right now, we need you. Maybe look at where you're sourcing those competitions from. There are some really good websites out there that highlight them. The Guild highlights some in our regular newsletter, but also think about where you've seen and where you've heard about these competitions, and see what you can find out about the organisers and assess your financial contribution on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to be mindful that where we might be tempted to mention specific competitions or companies or whatever in the chat, I feel like it's a really good idea to just keep this to a general conversation today. And then if you want to recommend things to writers and you're on social media, by all means do that there. But we're just talking generally, because there are competitions that are just starting out and they don't have as great a structure to begin with, but they learn from that and they become different. And I think every year it's going to be different. They'll have different judges. Like, I'm cautious about us recommending specific things to each other right now. That's all. So we've talked about money, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again, but there are 3 types of things that we talk about when we talk about a reputable competition. So do you want to just talk about the second one, and then we'll come back to the other stuff in a bit?
I do. And the second one is professional development. I'll just share the screen for you if I can.
Obviously the Third Moon and Jupiter one that I mentioned is legit and everybody should enter it.
There you go. So it's professional development. So what we're saying is that a professional development prize should be practical and involve industry professionals who have specific experience in supporting writers in the development of their craft. So that's there.
What does that mean, specific experience? So you talked a little bit about this. This is the skilled people, isn't it?
We talked about this when we were talking about feedback. So your opportunity to have your work, I'm just going to focus on theatre a little bit here, though it applies in other contexts and we can pick up some of those a bit later. The opportunity, for example, often given as a prize, is you will have the opportunity to see your work on stage. Now, we know that if you're a playwright, that's what you want to do with your work. You want to see your work on stage,
screen, or in print,
on screen, in print. The opportunity to see it in this way. However, that's great if it's a good production. The opportunity to see your work absolutely destroyed is a much less exciting prize. Yeah. An opportunity to have your reputation tarnished forever in the minds of your peers.
Less valuable
To your career. And so we think, well, how is this being put on? Is this a professional production? It comes back to the point that we're always making, is be mindful of the I am a producer. The basic qualification for being a producer is saying I am a producer. And now there are loads of brilliant producers out there that do phenomenal work, and I do not in any way want to show them any disrespect, but it is easy to present yourself as a producer. So when someone is saying we're a production company, we're this, we're that, we're a
publisher, we're a poetry
publisher, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a director, all of these things are easy to say, much harder to demonstrate through existing professional portfolios. So do your homework. The opportunity to have your work put on stage where, by whom, in what way?
I would also say it's really important to have some self-awareness around this. So at the beginning of my career, whenever anybody put my work on stage, because theatre is what I do, I was so overwhelmed with astonishment at that experience that I had no way of actually learning about my work objectively, because I was just like, oh, it was so exciting and everyone said nice things, which is great and valuable. But if that's not what you're being offered, if you're being offered proper professional development rather than just an extraordinary experience, then you need to be ready for that. You need to be able to be objective about your work and about that process. You need to have experience and understanding or guidance as to how that works. And it can just be that if you don't have experience of that and no one's talking to you about it and you're not sure how it works, that you can just say, what guidance is there for me to learn from this process? So
and this is where as well we start to get to the issue of rights, because the opportunity to have your work put on stage, if you're being commissioned to put your work on stage, if you're being commissioned to write for the screen, for a magazine or whatever, you have certain rights in your work, and you need to be really clear what you're granting. So if I'm a producer and I run a festival and I want to commission work for that festival, I have to pay certain amounts of money to the writers, to the actors, to everyone else in order to do that. What we think is unfair is for me to say, well, actually, I don't have the funds to do that. So I'm going to say it's a competition. And what will happen is all of these playwrights will give me their work and I won't have to pay them. So then I can afford to pay the actors and a director to put it on. And that's going to save me, several £1,000s. Now that is a cut price commission, right? Because those are the opportunities. That is where, or I want to launch a magazine. I want to do this. So I'm going to say I've got a writing competition and get everyone to send me their work for free. And then the prize is that they'll get published. Actually, all I've done is I've just managed to generate work for myself, you know, for myself as a producer without paying what I would normally have to pay.
And that builds a platform for the producer. So I've seen several people advertise that they've writing a new, they've got this new magazine and they're looking for articles for it. And if you want to submit an article, it's in this area that really involves you and you're going to be excited about it because we know it's your thing. If we choose to publish your article, it will give you good exposure. And suddenly we're in the world of a competition without the word ever being said. And it's all framed to make it out that you'd be lucky to be published and that it would be great for your profile. So shall we talk about that third thing, Lesley?
Yes, let's talk about that third thing. And I'll just see if I can share this again. No, I can't. I'm sorry, I'm having a few technical difficulties.
It's all good.
With the screen sharing. It is refusing point blank to share.
I wonder if I can link to that. I can't easily link to it.
Here we go. I'll do it like this. It's just going to have to be.
Cool.
There you go.
There it is.
Access to a greater audience and or industry specialists. So exposure.
Exposure, that thing that Sainsbury's will let me pay them in when I want to go and buy groceries.
Absolutely. No, you won't find that you get much for exposure. Now, this can be fantastic. You know, who wouldn't want the opportunity to have their work read or seen or whatever by people who can recognize what they're looking for, who can say, yes, this is perfect. Yes, this is exactly the sort of work that we like to produce. That's great. But it's really important to ask who these industry professionals are. And there's a big difference between invited audiences and confirmed audiences.
So, but it's not enough if I just say, well, you write musicals. I've invited Cameron and Andrew. I've invited them. That's not enough.
It's not enough. You want to know who and how you're going to know that is one of the best ways to do is to.
I've always invited Cameron and Andrew, just to be clear. They've never come.
But it is important to know who's going to be there. It's important to ask yourselves, how likely is it that the people organising this competition are going to be able to pull these in? A good way to do that is to look at their track record. Look for any competition generally. It's a really good thing to look at what's happened to previous winners. You know, can you see the publication? Can you see the production? Can you see the film? You know, did it go on to win? You know, what happened at this film festival? Is it something that anyone's ever heard of or seen again? And frame your expectations around that.
I think this is the same. We should just say that if somebody's promising a magazine with a readership of thousands, is that actually the truth? If it's like you get a slot on the radio, is it prime time or is it the midnight shift? What are the other details around that thing?
The web is a really interesting area at the moment. There are literally thousands, if not more, online books, online journals offering prizes, which is you will get to be published on our website. Now, for some types of writer, particularly what I'm going to call genre writers, this can be absolute goldmine, right? If this is the website that everyone who likes a certain type of science fiction is on and is reading, and that is where your audience are going, yes, the opportunity to have your work on that is going to be great, because you're going to go direct to the people that you hope are going to buy your work in the future, read your work in the future. Perfect. If it's a kind of startup, bit more obscure, really it's someone doing it from their bedroom and it's got a really small readership, you've got to make a judgment. We're not going to say you shouldn't do that, because there are some amazing journals with some really interesting work out there in that way. But you do need to be clear what it is you're getting.
Yeah,
and this is where
niche markets might be
balance
yeah
of what you're being asked to pay to enter, or whether it's free entry. And again, and this comes down to it, the rights that are being taken, because really they shouldn't be taking any rights other than a limited license for work.
I'm just going to do a quick aside, because several people have messaged me privately about specific things. The best way to do that is to be a member of your union and write to the guild officers and say, I'm looking at this specific invitation to put my work forward. What do you think? Because that's what they're there for. And all that contact information for them is in the member area of the website. And if you're not a member, join. We'll talk to you about that later. So you're now talking about fair exchange, Lesley, which is, I think, the biggest and most important thing. So it's not just with competitions, it's often not just that there's just a cash prize, or not that there's just profile raising, or not that there's just professional development, but often there's a sort of mixture of those things, isn't there?
Yeah, this is it very often. And this is what makes it quite complex and quite difficult sometimes to assess from the off without really doing your homework, is that often it will be a combination. So, for example, there may be a fee for a piece of work which is slightly lower than you would expect on an industry standard, but you're also going to be given some intensive coaching and mentoring from really established industry professionals. And you're going to be given a showcase where your work is going to be seen by others. And you're going to get a few other bits, t-shirt and the hat and sort of, you're going to get a combination of different things. And what you have to try and do then is work out the sort of relative package. Because often there are situations, and we have to be mindful, we've just gone through a global pandemic, and it's been really, really difficult for the arts in particular. People have been really hit. And that what some people have been doing is said, I can't afford to give you this, but I can give you free rehearsal space for a year, or I can give you access to some software for 12 months for free, or I can give you subscriptions to various things, and you can do that. You can get a combination of things, but it is about that total cost. The total benefit to you, your career and your writing must always be greater than the cost to you of entering.
And what you would get if they were making an open invitation, an open call for actual commission.
Exactly.
So all of that stuff refers back to those three important things: the money, the professional development, and the profile raising. So what about terms and conditions, the lovely buzz phrase, the small print terms and conditions? How do we, what should we expect to get in return for what we put forward?
Okay. Terms and conditions should be the first thing that you look at before you even consider entering a competition. Because if there aren't any, if there are no visible terms and conditions, then that should be a red flag. Because there will be some somewhere, but you need to know what they are. Any reputable competition will publish its terms and conditions, or will tell you how you can access them, because sometimes, especially if it's for film or TV, they can be very lengthy, so they'll have them somewhere separate, but you should always get them.
Should I feel guilty or like I'm making a fuss if I ask for terms and conditions?
No, because any reputable competition organizer will understand that any professional or would-be professional aspiring writer is going to want to see those. So you should not be embarrassed if you can't find them of asking for them. And if there's something in it that you don't understand, don't be embarrassed to ask for clarification.
Isn't that going to have an impact on whether or not, on how they regard my work though in the competition, if I make a fuss?
I mean, it might do, and if it does, then it suggests that it's not the sort of competition that you want to be entering, really, because anyone who's doing things with good intent and in goodwill will be open and transparent about it. There's no reason why you should want to hide the terms and conditions.
I have to say, it is I do it. I ask always. And there's always a thing in me that goes, oh, I shouldn't be making a fuss. Please make a fuss. We all need everybody to make a fuss in that way. Like, it isn't a fuss. It's a really important
thing. It needs to be really transparent, because, and this is where you will see precisely what is being taken. In most craft areas, almost all, you would be looking for a limited, non-exclusive use of your work. So obviously you've got to grant them the right. If the prize is, I'm going to publish it, you have to grant them the right to publish it. So that should be included. But you shouldn't be granting blanket rights. You shouldn't be granting exclusive rights unless there's a very, very significant payment, really, or that there's a whole package that, you know, you've got to dig in. Normally,
should we talk about whether the craft areas differ in terms of rights?
It is worth saying that they do differ. So in theatre, you'd be looking at a sort of limited license. In the other areas, it's in sort of books, and it would be a restricted license, so it would be limited in certain areas. It wouldn't, for example, if you've entered a short story to a magazine competition, there is no reason for them to be taking the film and television rights, and yet some do, or the audio exploitation rights, or, you know, these are the things you go, yes, well, obviously you're going to want to publish it. There's a difference between them being able to publish it and them then owning it forever.
And also, we should just be even more clear, I think, about what the limitations are. Length of time that they get to do anything with it. So one performance, or publish it for in 1 week's magazine, or on the website for a specific amount of time. Territories, so publish it in England or produce it in England, but not worldwide, or maybe in English speaking countries, but that's a territory thing as well. So limitations on that. Limitations on how many performances you can do, like iterations of it. So all of those things are anything that any kind of usage, how long they can use it for, where they can use it, what they can use it for, all of those things can be limited and should be limited in a competition.
Yeah, but they will differ craft area to craft area.
Yeah.
And publishing is where it gets quite complicated. You need to be really clear that you've not signed something that means that they can just publish it anywhere. So you might want to say, well, you can publish it in this magazine, but you can't then publish it in anthologies or whatever. You have to make that assessment based on the prize and the reward that's being offered.
And it can be a conversation. I think if you discover down the line that you've won, but what they're asking seems like a commission, it is fine to say to them, this feels like a full commission, and if you want these things, then we're negotiating a different kind of agreement. You know, and
some will be, and you know, in film, often when it's treatments, then you start to get into the world of assignments where you are signing things over, and those are much more complicated deals. You should always get the advice of the guilds or another legal professional if you're not a member.
That means giving away your ownership of your work entirely.
Giving it away too early, or for not enough money, and that's where it matters.
Financial prizes. How do we judge whether or not that's where are the markers?
Benchmarks.
Yeah.
So where there are minimum guild agreements, then you use those as a benchmark. So, for example, if you are organising the Alpha Centauri Playwrights Award, I'm not sure that's in our territories, but we'll do that because I don't want to inadvertently reference any existing competitions. You will see that a competition will have a prize which is roughly equivalent to a commission fee up to a certain point. So when you look at the guild agreements for both screenwriting and in theatre and audio, payments are broken down. So there's the initial payment, the commission signature fee. Then there will be payments that you would get on submission of the first draft. Then you would have acceptance payments, the point at which the company says, yes, we're going to take that forward. And then there'd be the final production payments. And so you want to be able to situate the prize fund against those in some way. That will give you a good benchmark of what it is that you're bidding.
I've linked to the rates and agreements page at the Guild's website, but if you're not sure, again, and you're a member, you can just ring the office and say, where can I find this information? What should I be looking at to make this comparison? So professional development, what if the prize is something like a free workshop of your work or something like that? Does that differ across craft areas? Do we think that's a good thing?
Well, again, it depends on who's doing the workshop, where the workshop's happening, and who with. And it's often where you're in a difficult position between the professional and the amateur. So some writers love working with non-professional actors, or students, very early stage career. They like to do that. Often those writers will be more experienced themselves. They'll also be very aware of their rights, so that they have a right to textual integrity, and that various people can't just do what they want with their work. It has to happen in a controlled way.
So I guess it's important to point out that there's a difference between the development of you as a writer and the development of a specific project.
Exactly.
And to make sure that you understand which of those it is that's on offer, and that you understand how much you are prepared and ready, equipped to take advantage of that offer.
Exactly. So getting a director and actors to try different ideas out with your work might be great for the director and the actors, but it might not actually inform your work that much. So is that really a prize for you? However, taking your script into a professional company with very experienced actors and directors, asking you as a writer questions about how you felt this would work, and they can't get this to sound right, and you rethinking it because you've looked at it or you've heard it, that's a development for you. And so that's a more worthwhile prize that you might want to consider. So it's really, I think, the big news that applies across all of this is to look beyond the headline. So a development opportunity, or the chance to see your work on stage, the chance to see your work in print, the chance to work with actors, that's not enough information. And you really do need to delve into those terms and conditions and the specifics of the competition to understand what you're getting.
I just want to say a couple of things about specific words, because chance and opportunity and all those words are often used in relationship to competitions. I've stopped saying submit my work. I try and say put my work forward these days, because submit just feels to me like some kind of weird inequality thing going on. But just be really wary of the word opportunity. Make sure there is an actual opportunity for you or for your work, rather than somebody just using the word and it being beguiling, because it can be very beguiling, the use of that word. So I think also for people who are organizing competitions, let's just keep an eye on our language. Is a thing that we can all keep talking about. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about is, some prizes will ask a writer to participate in marketing for their company. So you have to make a statement about the fact that you've won, or the company that you're working with. How do we regard that? How do we deal with that?
I think it depends on how comfortable you feel with the company. Okay. Writers have more or less levels of comfort with these sorts of things. I think the difficulty is when you've not been aware that you have, by virtue of entering, agreed to be featured in publicity. this is often the way, if for any reason you're asked to submit photographs or other personal information about yourself alongside your application, this is often because it's going to be a marketing exercise, and somewhere in the terms and conditions there will be clauses that say that by virtue of entering, you've agreed to share certain information. We're also very aware at the moment of all the things that are out there about data protection, data privacy, contacts. Competitions are a great way to harvest people's data, because there will be clauses in there that say, by submitting this competition, you agree to receiving marketing information, you agree we can share your information with other similar companies, you agree. There's all of these sorts of clauses that can be in there as conditions of entry. So you need to make sure that you know what conditions you've signed up for. There are some, few, but some competitions that by very nature of entering, you are granting the organisers rights to do things with your entries. Even if you don't win, they have still taken rights to do things with it. So effectively what happens is, once you've entered that competition, you've submitted your work into that competition, you can't then use it for anything else. This is why sometimes you will see in the descriptions of a competition, entries must not currently be being considered by other prizes. And you need to understand that sort of slang, that shorthand that's often used, because they're wanting to take some rights in the work, and that becomes questionable if you've submitted it to different places. So you also need to think, with this piece of work, is it something that I want to use beyond this competition? Is it something that I want to be able to take elsewhere? Or is it a piece of work that I'm going to craft specifically for this competition? And that can also, you know, make a difference. And this is where, for example, writing a poem, there may be a particular theme or a provocation that they're looking for you to write specific things about the beauty of the rainforest or the survival of an endangered species, and it's for a particular purpose. You may not be really likely to use it elsewhere other than other wildlife magazines or something. So that would be okay. But if
you want to support that charitable
if you want to support
goal.
that charity, but if it's something that it's a piece of work that you want to be able to take to other producers, other places, other theatres, other publishers, then you need to make sure that by entering, you haven't tied it down in some way.
It should also be noted that, so I'm going to give a personal example now. Is that okay? I think that's okay. Lesley, stop me anytime it's not okay. I'll be vague about it. I wrote a poem that I thought I was writing just to support a charity, and it was fairly widely seen, and I retained all the rights to it so that I can represent it if I want to in the future in a different way. I might decide that that representation of that thing will support the same charity, but the choice is mine whether or not to make that decision. So even though I decided to support that charity to begin with, and I didn't think it was going to go anywhere else, because it has been fairly successful in attracting attention to that charity, I might like to do something else with it, and I don't have to let them benefit if I don't want to. So it's about, even when you think, oh, I just want to support this thing and it's probably not ever going to do anything else, don't make that assumption. Like, always retain your rights anyway, because you never know what's going to happen with that piece of work or what else you might want to do with it in the future. I think it's a good example from my work that happened to me. We have some questions. Lesley, do you feel like we might be moving into sort of
let's go to some questions.
So one that was asked early on by Rachel was, are there any reliable resources to go to where somebody lists all of the good competitions and they don't list any of the bad ones? Is that a thing, Lesley? Does that exist?
I'm loath to say it exists. You should always still be careful. You can't take it for granted. You know, we try to check that the competitions that we advertise are legitimate, but you know, stuff can get through. There are some websites out there that list them, but even if they're legit websites, you've still got to check.
And the Guild newsletter sometimes contains some that we've had a look at and think is okay, right?
Yeah.
So there are resources where somebody will have already given them a once over, but even then it's up to you whether or not it would work for you, I think is the main message. Somebody asked, is being announced as a part of a shortlist or something similar part of profile raising? So if someone says, oh, I made the shortlist of the Mars writing competition, is that?
Well, it can be great. It can be brilliant. There is no doubt, and there is some evidence to suggest some of the new writing organisations did some research on this, that winning certain competitions or being shortlisted has been a real route for some writers into getting recognition, into boosting their profile. It's difficult in a crowded field to stand out. So sometimes these, winner of this prize or shortlisted for this prize, they can help. But, if it's shortlisted by the Alpha Centauri Cheesemakers Association Award, there's a limit to how much that's going to be. So I think there are the ones that are sort of industry-wide known, but if they're pretty obscure or lower level, then it's not always as helpful as you might think.
The Alpha Centauri Cheesemakers are a fine organisation. So there's been a question, also privately questions to me and also publicly, about hidden clauses in terms and conditions in rules and guidelines, whatever. Terms and conditions are often called rules or guidelines or something else.
Conditions of entry.
Yeah, about the company not having any legal liability over certain aspects. This question particularly says no legal liability to the writers for exploiting their copyright. So essentially making the writers give over their rights in a kind of veiled way. So
there's a couple of different, this is where you do need to be the member of a guild or another association or a professional association that can help you with some of this, because when you're not sure, because there are some clauses which are there legitimately to protect the organizer. So, for example, as you know, there's no copyright in an idea, there's only copyright in the expression of the idea. Things are in the zeitgeist, things are going on, right? So I might run a competition and say, right, I want entries on script submissions on the theme of modern life. It is not beyond the realms of possibility that I am going to get more than one script based on living in a pandemic to do with being locked down in certain situations. There's going to be some similarities. Similarly, the renationalization of railways, there's stuff that happens in the news, a tsunami, a nuclear incident. These things, it's likely that there's going to be more than one person who is writing something about that. So you're likely to get more entrants on a theme than you might think. So some of those clauses are saying we still reserve the right to make work that is a bit similar to yours, even if you haven't won and we haven't taken it on. And that's because you're likely to have, they're likely to have more than one similar themes. Others, however, are more about we reserve the rights to
exploit your work whenever we want.
Whenever we want, wherever we want. And the really dangerous ones is where they say we reserve the right to change it or to take aspects out of it. In other words, we don't like the script, but we thought that was quite a good character, so we're going to use that character in something else, and the ability to extract different elements. So you need to be mindful, but it can be quite confusing because the wording between some quite legitimate clauses and some more dubious clauses can be very similar if you're not used to reading a lot of contracts and terms and conditions.
And it's also worth bearing in mind that some people may just not be experienced in how to write those clauses yet. And if you approach them and say, does this clause mean this or this, and can we just clarify that, they might be open to that because it's helpful to them to develop the terms and conditions of their competition. So that conversation can be a useful one.
Now, I've just seen that someone has said, what does a legitimate clause look like? Off the top of my head, I'm going to struggle to quote it verbatim. However, we have got some stuff in the booklet, and there is some contracts on our website and some sample stuff on the website that you can have a look at in the resources section.
Yeah.
And if you're not sure, then do get in touch.
Ask. So what happens if I don't read the terms and conditions, or I don't understand them, or I couldn't find them, or something accidentally, and then now my work has been assigned, my copyright has been assigned to this competition? Do I have any recourse? How do I deal with that?
Well, because effectively you've entered into a contract. When you've signed and you tick those boxes that we always just tick and go click, I accept the terms and conditions, you've entered into a contract with the organizer. There are still some limits on what they can do. There's still the law, there's still copyright law, there's contract law, and so we at the Guild have had experience where someone has entered into competitions and they're not that comfortable with what's happening, and then it's just gone that step too far. We've been able to intervene. So in those situations, for members, we will look at what you've entered into, what the nature of that contract is, what the limits of that contract is, and what, if any, recourse you then have, and we can advise with that and support members through that process, and have done so.
What about being asked to pay for tickets to go and see your successful performance of your winning play? How does that? You've won, we're putting your play on, we're not going to invite you into rehearsals, and you have to pay to come and see it. Like, is that legit? Can
it's not legit. No. No, that's very mean. And we think that you should always get some complimentary tickets. You should always be invited to see your own work. You have a right to be present in the rehearsal room as the writer, and if it's being done in certain instances, you should expect the right to be paid for some of that, but that shouldn't happen, really. You shouldn't be asked to be then putting in more money. I've seen other competitions where people win the opportunity to have their work put on, and then they have to pay towards the staging. If it's costing you and you haven't won, is the general principle. You're not winning if you're paying.
There's a thing in theatre called curated hires, which is where a theatre comes to you and says, or producer comes to you and says, I really love your work, I really want to put it on. We can put it on in this venue. It's going to cost you this much money. You can raise that through a funding application. We'll help you with that. It's basically you hiring that producer or that venue, but it's called curated because they choose who's allowed to hire them.
Yeah.
So that they have some control over the work that gets put on there.
And there are some similar script writing competitions for film and TV, usually very, very small scale, very small companies, but where effectively what you're winning is the right to operate as a producer. So yes, there's a £5,000, £6,000, £10,000 prize, but it is that amount of money towards the making of the work. So it pays the actors, it pays the crew, it pays for the locations. It doesn't actually come to the writer as a fee.
And the important thing to note as well there is that you're then doing two jobs. You're being the writer and having to respond to the work as the writer, and you're being the producer. And if you don't have that skill set, then that's going to be an additional challenge that you have on top of responding to the work as a writer. And I mean, I know how to do both those things, and I find it hard to do both those things. So people who don't have any producing experience are going to find it even harder to understand how to negotiate a production contract apart from anything else. That's something that gets contracted separately.
And the other thing in Screen and some of the festivals and stuff like that, and this is really more of a note for early career writers, is you might write a film or a short piece of work. Do you want to commit to that piece of work at this stage in your career being perpetually available to audiences? Some people are utter geniuses, and the work that they produce right from the off is work that 30 years later they can still go, wow, I love that piece of work. But for many of us, they look back and think, I'd really rather people couldn't see that now. So the website, the festival website, the availability of work, how long it's available for is something to keep an eye on.
There's a question here from Laura. Do we think that the platforms advertising these opportunities should shoulder some of the responsibility for making sure they're legitimate? Now, further down in the chat, Kate, our lovely Kate, has said that we promote around 600 writing competitions alone every year via the member e-bulletin. And I think it's really important to maybe talk about a little bit about how we take responsibility for what we share. How do we decide what we send out to members?
We always have a look. We check that there are terms and conditions. We check that there's nothing too untoward.
Terrible.
Nothing that we would think, well, that doesn't look right. I mean, occasionally there are borderline decisions because there's always a sort of individual responsibility. Some people want to enter some of those competitions, but we try to make sure that they're at least a certain standard.
And do we think that every platform that advertises competitions should take that responsibility, or do we think that sometimes it's okay for just somebody to put everything out there? And like I know there's at least one newsletter that I think just scoops up everything that's available and throws it out there.
I mean, it's worth a lot of these newsletters and websites are just automated, effectively, feeds that will just scoop stuff up from everywhere and collect it in one point. I mean, there's huge numbers of these competitions. Well done, Kate. We agree entirely. There is some individual responsibility. It's difficult because of the length of terms and conditions, the number of competitions, and what writers want. And there are writers who legitimately, they just use it as a discipline. They use the deadlines of the competition, even if they don't enter them, they use the deadlines of the competitions as that motivator to help them power through. I'm going to get this work done by then because that's that submission day. I'm going to get it done by then because that's that submission day.
So Jill has asked a really good question or made a really good comment, which is that people who maybe aren't as well connected in the industry find that competitions are a really valuable route into making connections in the industry. So, and also some people use competition deadlines as a writing deadline. So let's just sort of talk about what the great things are about competitions and how they can be really helpful to us as writers, because those are two really good examples.
The deadline stuff is great. The connections is great if it's a legitimate competition. Yeah. But also it's really nice to have praise. Who doesn't want someone to say, well done, we thought yours was the best, we thought it was great. There's really, it's hard as a writer if you're just sort of slogging away day after day, year after year, month after month. Sometimes it feels like there's never really any opportunity for someone to even read your work. And I think finding an audience, everyone talks about how the internet has opened it up, but sometimes it is a bit like being in one of those crowded echoey rooms that there's so many voices, it's almost hard. So something that's going to focus in on your work, it's going to give you that chance, it's going to give you an opportunity to assess it, that can be brilliant. And
there's also competitions that this is my favorite thing, is that anyone who puts work forward for some of the bigger competitions is then invited to given a password for an area of a website that not everybody can get to, where there might be some video masterclasses about writing or something that even just by putting your work forward for a thing, you get access to something that is a lovely connecting thing. So there used to be a musical theatre competition that doesn't exist anymore, but part of when you put your work forward for it was you got added to the group of writers who'd put their work forward for it. So suddenly you were connected to a lot of other lovely writers and you could talk about what it is that you do. So I think there are some wonderful ways in which people really consider that they're making an invitation, and everybody who engages with that invitation in some way is investing something of themselves and their work in that, and to make sure that there is some kind of fair exchange for anyone who's going to engage in that way, I think is a really lovely thing.
As well, you know, I mean, much is made, and that we could probably do a whole session simply on the anthology industry, where there are lots of these competitions that result in anthologies of publications, be them short stories, be they poetry, whatever. Some people love them, some people hate them. Now, but for the people who love them, the opportunity to see their own work alongside the work of others, to see it in its context amongst the work of peers, can be really helpful. For others, it can be soul destroying, which is why I think some people really don't like them. But if that is what you find useful, then there are those opportunities. So this publication and this presentation isn't about saying don't enter competitions, competitions are bad. It's about saying competitions can be fantastic opportunities to develop your craft, to develop discipline, to get recognition, to get some financial support. But they must be seen as separate from professional commissions that are there to secure rights and the usage of professional work. And it's that grey bit in the middle that we're seeking to try and eliminate.
So if you're not sure, you see something you want to put your work forward to, and you're a member of the Writers Guild, get in touch and say, here's a thing, what do you think?
Offers the terms and conditions. If you get in touch with us and say, I want to know what about this competition, we will reply and say, can you please show us the terms and conditions? So you can speed that up by getting the terms and conditions first and send it us with the terms and conditions.
Yeah, and even point out the bits that you think look a bit suspect. That's even more helpful.
And what we will do then is we will highlight whether we think, or any particular clauses that we're concerned about, and send that back to you. So
I've run out of questions, and just a last shout out, does anybody have a question they want to pop into the chat quickly? And while you have a quick think about that, I just want to say, Lesley, thank you so much. I feel like this is such a hugely important piece of work, this document. And I hope that it will benefit not just writers, but also people who want to craft a competition or make an opportunity that actually supports writers in a really wonderful way, because I think so many people intend to do that. And maybe then there's no guideline out there to help them find their way. So I'm really delighted that this new publication is out, and I really hope that people spread the word about it. I think it's really
thank you, Jen, for all of the work that you put into this document, which was many hours of
me going, look at this, it's outrageous.
We do hope people find it useful. We also really want to say, competition organisers, you can speak to us.
Yes,
you can speak to us as well. If you haven't yet joined the Guild, do please find your way to our website. There are links in the chat. I know you would be very welcome. But otherwise, I think that's us done for this afternoon. It's been
also
lovely.
Thank you for joining us, so many people, and thank you for writing, because that's the most important thing in the world. Thank you.